Hello and welcome to Luke's Home Unboxing Studios. My name is Luke, of course, and in this video we are going to continue developing our website. So what we're going to do is, in the server folder, we're actually going to connect to a database. We're going to set up some tables, and we're going to do some simple interactions with the client just to begin with, and then we're going to expand that so that when we actually start getting real data, well, not real data, but test data anyway, we will then use that to manipulate our current HTML files and actually put some stuff on screen, some stuff from the database into the HTML files. And if you remember from previous videos, we had those strange template strings, percentage, categories, percentage. It's those kinds of things that we'll be replacing within those HTML files and then moving and transforming it into something that is representative of the data that we get from the server. So without further ado, let's get started. This is probably going to be quite a long-winded tutorial video because there's quite a lot to it. If we go to our side screen just momentarily, so what we've got is these template tags that I mentioned in the introduction video. These are the things that we're going to be replacing. So category navigation, those will be things like general development books, the category, which is actually this header here, and then we've got category content, which will be 3 columns. If you remember from previous tutorials, we had 3 columns, 2 news items and then a view more item. That obviously will ultimately be dependent on how many news items we actually have, any more than 3 basically. So we need to do a couple of things before we can do that. So what I'm going to do is, inside of WAMP, so I've got installed WAMP, so that is for Windows, Apache, PHP, and MySQL. I'm not going to be using MariaDB because Haxe and Record Libraries does not support that. We'll be using MySQL. I've also got HiDSQL on my computer, so that's what I'll be using to actually create the database and create all the tables. I'm not going to do that right now, but what I will do is, inside of here, I'm going to go to httpd-vhosts.conf. So I'm going to click on that, and what I want to do is I want to take this folder, I want to copy it, I'm going to cancel out of that, and I'm going to paste in here. And what I'm going to do is also copy, oops, wasn't meant to do that. Oh, I'm going to copy and paste this. So what this basically indicates inside of the Apache folder is the ability for us to, so this star basically means connect to, whatever IP address it can be, and then the port. Technically it is restricted because we've also got a server name and a server alias here. Let me see. So what I'm going to do is cut this, and I'm going to put it both in here. So this is the document root. So I'm just going to transform these backslashes into forward slashes. I don't know if backslashes work. I just convert it into forward slashes anyway because that's just force of habit more than anything. But it is something that we do need to do. Well, paste this directory at least anyway. And then I'm going to put it here. So this is kind of like the default htaccess options that will be available for this directory. And then we've also got server name and server alias. Here I'm going to put down just Luke Salmon. Now, in order for this to work, what I've got to do now is go into my documents somewhere, and I should have a hosts file in here. So I'm going to just type in hosts. I'm going to edit going to open with Notepad, and what I'm going to do is just add another one here. So that's going to be Luke Salmon, and so this hosts file is basically saying, okay, for this domain name, or well, it is technically a domain name or server name, whatever you want to call it. I want this to resolve to this. Now, typically, I'm not sure about Linux or Mac, so you'd have to look into it yourself, unfortunately. I can't really say much for those systems, but for Windows in particular, this is what you'll need to do in order for this to be resolved. So this is an example of that. So local host name resolution is handled either by the DNS. So if you are connected to the internet, then typically what would happen is it would attempt to resolve it automatically. If Windows sees this when you have the port 80 open, which is what web browsers will use to connect to data websites. When traffic is sent out, what Windows will do is it will actually check if the port 80 is actually open locally as well. And if it is, it's also going to check the domain name. Typically speaking, port 80 will be open, especially if you have a web browser open. Now, Apache also has port 80 open. And it's not just open, but it's also listening. So there's two, well, I need to rephrase that. So web browsers will listen on port 80 and Apache opens port 80, I believe, or it could be the other way around. I really can't remember. I'm not the best person to be explaining this kind of stuff, but basically what is effectively happening here is when Windows detects the fact that Apache has the port 80 open, or if any web browser is listening on a particular port, let's say port 80, and you've got a port 80 open with an application like Apache, then what Windows is going to do, or what the web browser is going to do, is when it does the connection to the domain, so let's say, for example, if I go back to here, I put here localhost instead of 127.1.1.0, it's still going to resolve, because going back to here, technically, imagine, for example, that you actually had to put it here, for example, 0.0.0.1, then localhost, right? Technically, you don't need to do that, because that's already it's already dealt with by the system anyway, so we don't technically need that. But for example, if that were the case, it will look in this list and it will find, okay, you've actually got this domain name pointing to this web address, so it will do that first, and that will override the DNS settings of your internet service provider or your local system, and it will point to that web address instead of what the actual web address might have otherwise been if had you not had that web domain inside of the hosts file. If that makes any sense. I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but I'm trying my best to explain it. But anyway, so we've got this host file. Now, in order for that to work, I need to go to my C drive, and I need to go to Windows, and then let's see, System 32, and then where is it, drivers, etc, and then I'm going to paste, and I need to have administrator permission, that's fine. So what I should now be able to do is actually be able to connect to Luke Salmon. Now, the reason I needed to do that is if I wanted to actually start using these PHP files, it would not work without Apache being able to connect to this directory and setting this directory up as a domain name thing. Yeah, whatever. I'm gonna forget explaining stuff now. So what I'm going to do now is just restart the server, and that will restart and rerun. So there we go. It's now green. That means it's working. Of course, if I were to go back to our directory here and I just type in localhost, for example, not localhost, sorry, that's interesting. Luke Salmon, that's what I meant. No. What are you doing? This is HTTP, like that. So as you can see, we actually have, because of the hosts file, we're able to resolve to 127.1.1.0. Let me just show you that for a moment so that you can see. So this is our HTTP Luke Salmon, and that is showing. So that is basically proving that we have set up Apache correctly. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work on this router, because at the moment, as you can see, we had to do quite a few sort of workarounds last time. We have this default, and so what I'm going to do is I want to basically create more of a an actual router instead of what this is currently, because at the moment it's not working exactly how we would want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a local variable called routes, and I'm going to split the URL by /. So this is going to be a more effective way of finding out whether or not we are within a specific page. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the first item in that route, and I can get rid of this / now, and everything else should in theory be fine. Now, apart from this bit, obviously, because well, everything's within all of these items are in that pages file anyway, so that should be fine actually, thinking about it. So we've got, you know, news.htm that we can get, we've got books, projects, etc. So what I'm also going to do is I just want to double check and make sure that our routes.length is greater than 0. Just to be 100% sure. And then what I'm going to do is compile that and see how that looks. So I'm going to say Haxe build.ajax.ml. I'm going to go back to my side screen, and what I'm going to do is I am going to refresh. So Shift F5, and let's just go to books. Yeah, that's working. About, that's still working. Projects, that's still working. Okay, so we haven't really changed much in terms of what we are seeing. However, what we have done, if we go to developer tools and we go to sources, scripts, main.js, so this is what's generated. And if we find our main, let's go here. So as we can see, we can actually find that actually yes, we've got url.split slash, and also, as you can see, it's not actually using switch statements in this case, it's just using typical if statements. And we're also getting rid of that forward slash because we didn't need it anymore, and it's working on all of this, which is great. So the reason I wanted to do that very simple change, as much as that might be simple, is because when we actually come to working with more complicated URLs, like say when we go to when we scroll over here, hover over here, for example, we've got in the corner, if you can see that, it's very tiny, I know, we've got hash news / category / general. So we want to be able to handle URLs like that so that we can figure out what kind of data we want to get from the server when we click on it. So going back to our main, now before we even think about handling those kinds of URL cases, the first thing I want to do is go to my main server class here. And in here, I want to be able to connect to a database. Now, as mentioned, let's switch to build server, so this will properly compile and give us the correct errors wherever. So what I would like to do is just make sure that we can actually connect to a database. Now, what I'm going to do is open up HideSQL. It's just root, there's no password, I'm just going to open that. There's quite a few databases here, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new database, and I'm going to call it LSDB. I'm not actually 100% sure what the collation means, to be honest. I should probably look into that at some point, but I'm going to keep it at the default, which is Latin 1 Swedish CI. So I'm just going to press OK there. If you're hardcore into databases, don't get advice from me. Just don't. Oh, I know the basics of databases. I'm not going to pretend I know everything when it comes to databases. There are certain experts out there that can do a better job than me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a simple table in here. I'm going to call it news. I'm going to put in a couple of parameters in here that I know is going to be part of this news table. So I'm going to have it auto increment. I'm not going to allow null, and I'm going to make this the primary key. I'm going to have a title. Actually, I'm going to lowercase these. And this is going to be a varchar of 32. So actually, I'll make it 64 instead of 32. And in here, I'm going to have no default. We're going to have content. So this is actually going to be the content. This is of the news article. I'm going to make this medium text. It's going to be quite large. We're going to have date posted. This is going to be a date time. So that's there. That's going to be current timestamp so that we don't have to do anything. Should I have a date updated? What did I have in my news page? So let's go ahead and take a look. News item. So we have date posted. We also have our category, so we want to put that in there as well. So we've got, let's make that content instead of description. So we've got date posted, title, content, and category. So what I want to do is I want to match the values there, and you'll find out why when we actually come to using Haxe in particular. I'm not going to be, like I said, I'm not going to be using Haxe initially. and category. That was the last thing that we saw. That's going to be an int, and we're going to shall I make that unsigned? No, I'm not going to make it unsigned. And what I'm instead going to do is in custom, the value is going to be -1. So I'm going to save that. Also, actually, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to change the engine to InnoDB. The basic difference with InnoDB and something like MyASM is InnoDB has the ability for foreign keys, so we can add foreign keys. Well, we can add foreign keys in MyASM, I think, as well, but you can't do things like reinforced constraining and things like that. Like I said, I'm not a database person. I'm not the best person to give you explanations about databases. I only know the basics, so I'm not going to assume anything. I do know the basics of relationships, though, so I will give you a little bit of information regarding that, but I just want to get database working. And so what I'm going to do now is inside of server, in the server class main. So I was just putting up a table together just to make sure that everything, just to get a table existing. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to import, let's see, sys.db.manager, and I'm also going to import sys.db.mysql. So in here I'm going to say var cnx is equal to MySQL. In fact, no, I'm not. I'm going to use manager.cnx, sorry, and that's going to be equal to, actually, yeah, I'm going to do it this way, sorry. So I'm going to do var cnx sorry, and then MySQL docx, and then inside of here I'm going to have a couple of parameters. So I'm going to say host, that's going to be localhost, so we want to connect to our local database. I'm then going to say port. I'm actually going to say null. It's going to use the default, which is 3306, which is what the default MySQL port is anyway. What next? I'm going to say database, and in here I'm going to say lsdb. Then I'm going to say user, that's going to be root, and password is just going to be empty because it was empty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if cnx is not null, then I'm going to say, let's see, manager.cnx is equal to cnx. Otherwise, what I'm going to do, and this is because this is Ajax, there's a specific way I'm going to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say lib.print, and this is going to be from import php.lib. So lib.print, and in here I'm just going to say connection failed. Now, if this was a PHP page, it would be a lot easier. And what I could do is I could just do that very quickly. But if we were using Ajax, then it would be slightly different. So what I could do is I could say, not new folder, what am I doing? Delete. So what I could do is I'm going to rename this to PHP instead of HTML. inside the file, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to say project settings. I'm going to say HTTP Luke Salmon, like that, and then I'm going to reconnect to the page. Let's actually go to there. So it's still working, as you can see. We've got index.php there, so that's fine. But what I'm now going to do is, if we go to here and say Haxe build server .ajax.ml, we compile that. So that's compiled, and it's generated some code inside of our main.php. Oh, right, okay, interesting. Why did it? Server main.php, oh, it's in here. Interesting. So is that where it's calling it? Because it doesn't look like it's calling that at all. Use server. Oh, right, okay. So it looks like it's going to be calling that. Okay, that seems fine. So what I'm going to do now is just include it. So let's say I've got PHP and then require includes / index.php. Right. So as you can see, if we go to our side screen, it's actually not doing anything. But if, say, for example, I decided to turn off the MySQL server, let's just turn it off. Stop service. And then let's try it again. And now I can't connect. So, I mean, we didn't actually get our error, probably because it threw this error, as you can see. So it's thrown this uncaught error exception MySQL cannot connect to the targets. But anyway, that was basically a simple example of dealing with that. If we were using let's start that. If we were using, for example, AJAX, which we are doing, then how would we go about doing that? Well, what we would do is, as we did typically here, when we had that exception, I wouldn't. So what we would need to do is we would have to actually wrap it around a try-catch statement, which I do not like. This is the kind of programming that really bothers me, because try-catch statements is like saying, oh, I don't know if this code is going to work, so I'm going to wrap it around a try-catch statement to see if it works or not. And if it doesn't work, then I'm going to catch the value. And it's like, well, if you don't know your code doesn't work, then why are you programming in the first place? That's kind of like what that code is implying. And it's very terrible practice, in my opinion. Very, very bad. This is one of the reasons why I don't like object-oriented code, but I'm going to do it in this case anyway, just to prove a point. So Anyway, little bit of a rant going on there, and now you know why I mostly code in procedural style. But anyway, point is, if I were to try catch that, I'm not going to do that in practice because I don't like it, but just to prove, let's compile that. And what I'm now going to do is inside of our client, because I'm going to actually be connecting to the database. So what I'm going to do is say static function get. So I'm just gonna, you know, do a typical get function. I don't really care. Let's just copy and paste this. And what I'm going to do is, instead of doing this, well, yeah, let's just copy and paste that actually. So what I'm going to do is present a Boolean value. So what I'm going to do is, here I'm going to say get and then function. So this is going to be content and then whether or not it's successful. Now, I wonder how you get the return code from the server in get return code from server JavaScript. So I don't know, something like that. This is the status code. Yeah, I thought so. Okay, so, well, yeah, I suppose that would be. So, let's see. So if, let's say, for example, else if request dot ready state is equal to 4, but this time our request dot status is actually going to be 500, meaning internal server error. What I'm going to do is say, well, our response, we'll still send our response text over because that will contain the string as to the fact that it failed. And what I'm going to put in here is say false. This is going to be true instead. So in here, what I'm going to say is include /index.php. So I'm just going to connect to that database just to see if it works in our AJAX request. I'm going to say if not successful, then I am going to just do a simple browser alert. So I'm going to say browser.window.alert, I believe, or it might be document actually. Let's just double check. Haxe.org. Let's go to our API documentation. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, JS. In fact, I should be looking at development, technically speaking. So let's go to browser. Is it inside here? Alert. Doesn't look like it. Okay. So it must be in window then. Window. These are all variables. Where's our functions? Alert. Yes, I thought it might be. Okay. So if we go to here, we've got window.alert, and I'm just going to put in the content string there. Else, we'll just print some, well, we're not going to be printing anything for the time being. I just want to prove a point here. So we've got a try catch statement. So what I'm going to do, let's just make sure we compile that, and we compile this as well. Haxe build.ajax.ml. Okay. So I'm refreshing this. Obviously it's not doing anything at the moment because MySQL is in fact available. I'm going to just disable that again for the time being, just to see if our browser alert comes up. What I'm now going to do is again refresh. Oh, did I disable it? Oh, I forgot one thing. We forgot to actually set the return code. So what I'm going to do is php.web, and inside of here what I'm going to say is web.setReturnCode. That's going to be 500. Sorry about that, I completely forgot about that. So let's just compile. I'm going to go back to the side screen. I'm going to refresh. Why? Mortals, let's have a look. Let us have a look. So this is our scripts file. Let's just find main. So we've got our get if we're not successful. So let's just break point on there and see what's going on. We're not actually, we've called it now. Okay. So are we successful? We are apparently successful. That should not be the case. What is going on? That's interesting. Let's break point here instead. What I'm going to do is, let's see, so our request, what is our request status? It's 0 at the moment. Let's just continue. Continue. Our status is now 200. Why is it 200? Should be 500, right? But our ready state is 2. Okay, well, let's continue. Status is still 200, now it's 3. Let's continue again. Ready status is now 4. Again, status is 200. Okay, that's interesting. But our response text is not something we can technically. This is kind of experimental, because the connection still failed. Now I am not sure of a way to actually test the server side. But that should have try catch statement should have technically worked, really. Well, it was an interesting idea. I was trying to prove a point, but I guess this still proves my point, is even try catch statements don't even work in PHP. But anyway, I mean, my point is I don't tend to use try catch statements, especially in production code. I don't think it's a good idea. If you know code isn't going to work, then don't type it. It's as simple as that, really. But anyway, point being, I just wanted to make sure that we had that going. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to here, and I actually want to create a table that represents this inside of our code. Now there's two stages that I want to do. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is just get rid of all this. So I'm going to go back to where I was previously, which is here. Okay, so first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder in here, and I'm going to call it data. Then I'm going to create a file, and this is going to be called news.htm. Now this has to be exactly the same name as it is in here. So this is news. We're using, and technically we're using plural, and you have to be consistent with plurals in your singular. And singulars, that sort of thing. I was wondering what I was talking about there for a minute. Oh, I might need to reconnect to the server, start it up, I mean, so that might be a good idea. But anyway, so we've got this news, and we've got ID, title, content, date posted, category. So inside of here, what I'm going to do is create a class called news, and I am going to extend sys.db.object. This is going to contain these definitions here. So we've got ID. So I'm going to type public var ID. Now, first of all, I need to import sys.db.types, because that contains all of our database types. So this is going to be SID. Now, technically, we could have created this table from our Haxe context, but I prefer to do it this way. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Title. So I'll have a title string. That is a varchar. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say string and then 64 here. We've got a content. Oops, we've got a content which is medium text. So that, if I remember correctly, is just as text, medium text, as you can see. We've got our date posted. So that is date underscore posted, and that is a date time. So I'm going to say date time. And finally, a category, which is going to be an int. And last but by no means least, I'm going to say public function new super, and that'll be it for the time being. Now the next thing I'm going to do is in my shared folder, I'm actually going to type, I'm going to have a T news. Now what this is going to be is a type def. Now you're probably wondering, well, why have two structures? Why have two definitions for the same thing? Well, the main reason being is because type def works hand in hand with JSON. And what I mean by that is when we actually come to parsing JSON from here, because we could parse the JSON from here, we could create a JSON file that represents all of this data using tnews, and then we send the JSON string to the client, and then the client parses it back into a structure for tnews. The reason we want to do that is because we can use this as to form part of our strictly typed programming, because if we work with dynamic, the Haxe compiler has to assume quite a few things, and we might come into some runtime errors, which is not what we want. We want to make sure that we capture most of our errors at compile time if we can. So we want to take advantage of the Haxe compiler, and this is why we use the Haxe compiler for both the client and the server side, so that we can capture a lot of these errors ourselves. So in here, what I'm going to say is I'm going to have all of my values optional, and these are going to be basic Haxe types instead of our database specific types that we had. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say optional var id optional var. I'm just going to copy all of these, and I'm just going to paste optional over here. Now optional is quite literally exactly what it means. So the reason I'm doing it this way is, the reason I want it all optional is because I don't want when creating TNews or anything like that, let's say in JavaScript context, if I want to create this and I just want to put in a title and a content or whatever, I don't want to make any errors, like say for example with the ID. This ID value is not going to be set by us, it's going to be set by the database, so we would definitely want that optional. When we come to creating, say, a control panel to manage all of this content, and we create our own content management system for this kind of stuff, then I want to be able to access this data on demand rather than immediately. Does that make sense? So let me give you an example. So let me implement that in here. So what I'm going to have in here is a toTypeDef function, and in here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say var data, and I'm going to import that shared.tnews, right? So this is going to be of type tnews, and I'm just going to declare it like this. Now the reason why I want to be able to do that is because, let's say for example I've got a form in HTML, I want to be able to access each individual piece of data on demand when I click submit, for example. So that means that when we mark everything optional, we don't have to set everything in this context here. So if they weren't optional, I'd have to say ID, and then I'd have to put in an ID there, then I'd have to say title, etc. Right? I don't want to have to do that, so I'm going to make them all optional. Now in this case, I'm actually going to be setting everything. So that's going to be this.id. In fact, technically I don't need to do that. I'm just going to say ID there. That's going to be data.title. That's going to be title. Data.content is equal to content. You can see how tedious this gets very quickly. Data.date posted. Date posted. Right. Data.category is equal to category. And then I'm going to return data. So this is basically saying when we actually start dealing and actually accessing this news eventually, which we will eventually start doing, what I'd like to be able to do is actually get that news data and manipulate it on the server, and then, or JSONify or whatever, and then send it back to the client. So let's do a simple test, shall we? So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to say, let's just create a new row. I'm just going to put in a random title, basic example. Let's again put in some lorem ipsum. So what I'm going to do is, I already have that somewhere, so let's just go ahead and copy this. I'm just going to paste that in there. I'm going to leave date posted blank, and category, that I'm just going to leave it -1. So I've just created a basic news item. So what I'm now going to do is inside of here, in fact, first what I'm going to do is inside of here I'm going to have a question mark and then page is equal to, and inside of my get I'm going to say URL string. So I want to pass in that URL here. Okay. So I want to get a value. We're going to send what is basically a parameter. So this is a key value pair parameter. So if you're so this is what will eventually become page is equal to news, right? So let's imagine we want to get every single news item that currently exists in the database. So I'm going to have this key value pair. So this is the parameter, this is the parameter name, and that's the value there, news. So how would we go about doing that on the server? Well, the way that we would do that is inside of the server, we would, imagining everything's going fine here, what I would do is I would say, well, I want to get the params. So I'm going to re-import my php.web, and in here I'm going to say web.getParam, or get params, I think actually, dot get and then page. So that's the page name I was talking about earlier. Let's call it this page, and let's say if page is equal to news. So if the page is equal to news, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get all of it, all of the news that we can find. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I'm going to import data.news. Server.data.news, and then in here what I'm going to say is var all is going to be equal to news.manager .all. So I want to get all of them, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, create JSON to return back to the client. So this is going to be a string. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate over each of those items. So item in all. So I want to get all of the items, and I'm going to get each one. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say content plus in fact, what am I doing? This needs to be an array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say content.push item.toTypeDef. Finally, what I'm going to do is lib.print JSON. So we need to actually import that. So import haxe.json. Oops. .stringify and then content. So we are getting all of the news items. We're iterating over each one. We are converting each item to a type def. That was this one here, right? And then we're converting it into a string, and then we're printing that on the main output or whatever that might be. So back inside of our main client, let's go ahead and try that. So what I'm going to do is, instead of success, I'm going to just say this. So inside of our get, I'm going to put in news here, and if we are successful, I'm going to get element by ID. I'm going to get content, and then what I'm going to do is I'm also going to let's see, get our news item from here, right? So I want to get all of this. So I'm going to also get this item, news dash item. So I want to get page, news dash item, well, pages slash news dash item.html, and I'm going to get that result. So once I've got all of that data, so the content is our data, technically speaking. So I'm going to convert that into an array, which is shared.tnews, and that's going to be again JSON, and this time we're going to parse it to import haxe.json. So this time I'm going to parse the content. We're going to get the page, and inside of here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say we just want to parse the first item, let's say. So imagining there is more than one item, so let's just double check that and make sure. So if data.length is greater than is equal to 0, then I'm just going to return and do nothing. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is I should probably get that ID element there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, we're using jQuery in this context, and in fact I should probably use build.ajax.ml here so that works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say I want to parse into each one of these. So we've got a percentage title, for example. So result is equal to, I'm going to use string tools for this just to make it easier for myself. String tools, so I'm using string tools. So I'm going to say result.replace. So I'm going to replace the title with whatever data0.title is. We're going to do the same for description, content. That's going to be content there. Date posted. And I'm going to leave the category for the time being. What's going on there? Did I? Oh, that is a date. I just forgot to make that a string. So I need to do toString. Right. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is basically say new JQ, well, jQuery, whatever. Well, it says JQ there, so that should be fine. Why did it import it twice? Don't do that. JQ, don't do that. So inside of our element, I'm just going to say HTML is whatever the result is, and I'm going to comment all of that out. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to compile both. So build server, we've compiled that. Compile this. That's compiled. So let's see if that actually works. So I'm going to go back to here. So let's refresh. It does not appear to have worked. Interesting. Developer tools. What is going on? Uncaught exception. Get month is not a function. Interesting. What is going on here? So let's refresh. So that's happening on get page. So the URL is something. Let's continue for the time being until our ready state is 4. Okay, so got our ready state is 4 and our response. So our response text is that. Okay. So it goes for a callback. Help to use resource. The server responded with this. What? But we just saw the content. What the hell is going on? Well, it's got something to do with dates anyway. So date.getMonth is not a function. Why is that? Okay, well, let's just refresh again and see what's going on there. Don't know why it's taken so long. Okay. So we've got our, as you can see, result. We've got our basic example. We've got our lorem ipsum being put in there as well, which is all good. But when we come to our date posted, it doesn't appear to have worked, which is interesting. So what's going on here? For some reason, date.getMonth is not. When we do that, it's not working. That's interesting. That looks more like a Haxe problem than anything else. That's probably going to have to be a asking the community of what the hell is going on there. So I'm going to leave it for the time being. Hopefully you understand the gist of how to get connected to a database, communicating with the server, and using AJAX and JSON to retrieve results. Obviously it wasn't working because, as we can see, there's a problem in the background that we cannot specifically fix ourselves, but well, we probably could fix it ourselves, but it looks more like a hack specific problem than anything else. But anyway, this video has been going on for quite a while now, so I'm going to leave it for the time being and get it uploaded. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. In the next video, what I'm going to be doing is putting the actual news page together using our newfound knowledge. So once again, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and hopefully I will see you again soon.